The mashed potatoes were getting cold on my plate when my mother delivered the blow that would haunt me for weeks. We sat around the mahogany dining table that had belonged to my grandmother, the same table where I had done homework as a child, where I had announced my college acceptance, where I had brought boyfriends to meet the family. Now, at 34, I was back in this chair, listening to my mother dissect my life choices with surgical precision. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. You'll die poor like always, Rachel, just like your father did. Some people are born winners, and some people are born to struggle. You've always been the latter. The words hit me like ice water. My fork clattered against the china plate. Across from me, my younger sister Jessica looked down at her hands, uncomfortable but unsurprised. This was our family dynamic. Mom delivered harsh truths while everyone else absorbed the collateral damage. I had driven 3 hours from my apartment in Columbus to attend this monthly family dinner, hoping maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time my mother would ask about my work at the nonprofit or show interest in the community center program I had been developing. Instead, she had spent the first hour critiquing my clothing choices, my lack of a husband, and my decision to work in social services rather than pursuing something more financially rewarding. But something about that particular insult felt different, final, like a door slamming shut on any hope of maternal approval I might have still harbored. I stared at her across the table, this woman who had raised me with a combination of love and constant disappointment. At 68, Patricia Donovan still commanded attention when she entered a room. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, despite being at home. She had always prided herself on appearances, on maintaining the facade of success even when our family finances told a different story. 2 days later, everything changed. Tuesday morning, I was reviewing grant applications in my cramped office at the Riverside Community Center when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. Ms. Rachel Donovan, this is Thomas Morrison from Morrison Hayes & Associates. We're a law firm here in Columbus. I'm calling regarding the estate of your great-uncle Edmund Whitfield. I frowned, trying to place the name. Edmund Whitfield? My grandmother had mentioned him a few times when I was young, always in hushed tones and never in front of my mother. He was her brother, the one who had left Ohio decades ago and never returned, the black sheep of the family, according to my mother's rare references. I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I think you have the wrong person. I barely knew my great-uncle. I haven't seen him since I was maybe 8 years old. That may be true, Miss Donovan, but you are specifically named in his will. Mr. Whitfield passed away 3 weeks ago in Seattle. He left very specific instructions about his estate, and you are the primary beneficiary. Primary beneficiary? The words didn't make sense. I had a vague memory of a tall man with kind eyes who had visited us once when I was very young. He had brought me a wooden jewelry box with a tiny ballerina that spun when you opened it. My mother had seemed uncomfortable with his presence, and he had left after just one night. I never saw him again. Mr. Morrison, I think there's been a mistake. My great-uncle and I had no relationship. Why would he leave me anything? That's something we'll need to discuss in person, Miss Donovan. Can you come to our office this afternoon? There are documents you need to see, and frankly, this is not a conversation I'm comfortable having over the phone. The law office was located in one of Columbus's historic downtown buildings, the kind of place where serious money was managed. I felt underdressed in my Target blouse and department store slacks as I rode the elevator to the 14th floor. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where Thomas Morrison was waiting with a stack of files that looked substantial enough to contain someone's entire life story. Morrison was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 45, with graying temples and the kind of expensive suit that suggested this law firm dealt with significant estates.
He stood when I entered, shaking my hand with the gravity of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. Ms. Donovan, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Before we begin, I need to verify your identity and relationship to Edmund Whitfield. He walked me through a series of questions about my family history, my grandmother's maiden name, details about my childhood that felt invasive but necessary. When he was satisfied, he opened the first folder. Your great-uncle Edmund Whitfield was a very successful businessman. He started with nothing, built a technology company from the ground up, and sold it for a considerable sum in 2018. He never married, had no children, and was estranged from most of his family for reasons that will become clear.
He slid a photograph across the table. It showed the man I remembered from my childhood, older now, but with the same gentle eyes. He was standing in front of a modern house overlooking what appeared to be Puget Sound, smiling at whoever was taking the picture. Mr. Whitfield was very specific in his will. He spent considerable time and money tracking down family members, investigating their circumstances, their character, their treatment of others. He hired private investigators, reviewed public records, even had people observe family interactions. My stomach dropped. Family interactions? Had someone been watching us? Morrison continued, apparently reading my expression. He was particularly interested in how family members treated each other, especially those who might be considered less successful or less fortunate. He believed that how we treat people when they have nothing to offer us reveals our true character. He opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be surveillance reports. My name was highlighted on several pages. Miss Donovan, your great-uncle had been observing your family for over 2 years, not intrusively, but enough to understand the dynamics. He knew about your work at the nonprofit, your dedication to helping underprivileged children, your financial struggles, and yes, he knew how you were treated by certain family members. The room seemed to spin slightly. Someone had been watching my family for 2 years? Someone had witnessed the criticism, the dismissal, the casual cruelty that I had accepted as normal. Morrison pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in careful handwriting. Mr. Whitfield left this letter for you, to be opened only after I explained the basic situation. But first, I need to tell you about your inheritance. He opened a thick legal document and turned it toward me. The numbers on the page didn't make sense at first. Too many zeros. I blinked and read again. $12 million, Miss Donovan. The estate consists of liquid assets, real estate, and investment portfolios totaling just over $12 million. There are also specific instructions for charitable donations that he wanted you to oversee, bringing the total under your control to approximately $14 million. I stopped breathing, literally stopped breathing until Morrison asked if I was all right. $12 million. The phrase bounced around in my head without landing anywhere that made sense. I made $38,000 a year at the community center. My savings account had less than $2,000 in it. I drove a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and bought my clothes at discount stores. There's more, Miss Donovan. Mr. Whitfield was very concerned about the impact sudden wealth might have on you, relationships particularly with family members who have not always treated you with respect. He's included specific recommendations and safeguards. Morrison handed me the sealed letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the penmanship of someone who had learned to write when such things mattered. Dear Rachel, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have just learned that your life is about to change in ways you cannot yet imagine. I hope this gift brings you joy, but I also hope it brings you wisdom. I have watched from a distance as you grew into a woman of character and compassion. While others in our family chose judgment and cruelty, you chose service and kindness. While others measured success by bank accounts and social status, you measured it by the children you helped and the communities you served. I know how you have been treated by those who should have supported you most. I know the words that have been said, the dismissals you have endured, the way your worth has been questioned because your bank account was smaller than others deemed appropriate. This inheritance comes with two requests. First, use this money to continue the good work you are already doing, but on a scale you previously could not imagine. Second, remember that wealth reveals character, both in those who have it and those who want it. You are about to discover who your true family really is. The lawyers will explain the practical matters. What I want you to know is this. You were worthy of love and respect long before this money existed. The people who could not see that then will suddenly see it now. Trust carefully. Your great-uncle who saw your true value, Edmund. I read the letter 3 times while Morrison waited patiently. When I finally looked up, he was watching me with something that might have been sympathy. Miss Donovan, there are many details we need to discuss, but I want you to understand the most important point. This inheritance is yours, free and clear, no conditions beyond what your great-uncle outlined in his letter. You can do whatever you want with this money.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing the story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The drive home from the law office felt surreal. I kept checking my phone to make sure I hadn't dreamed the entire meeting. The paperwork in my passenger seat proved it was real. $12 million, plus the additional charitable funds, plus real estate in Seattle that I now owned. I thought about calling someone, sharing this incredible news, but who? My sister would tell my mother immediately. My few close friends would struggle to believe it. My coworkers would view me differently. Suddenly, the isolation that came with this windfall became clear. Instead, I drove to the community center where I worked, parked in my usual spot, and sat in my car staring at the building where I had spent the last 6 years of my life. The after-school program would be starting soon. 37 kids from low-income families who came here because their parents worked multiple jobs and couldn't afford other childcare options. These children had always mattered to me. Now I had the resources to help them in ways I had only dreamed about. New computers for the lab, field trips to museums and theaters, college scholarships, maybe even a new building with proper facilities instead of the converted warehouse we currently used. But first, I had to figure out how to tell my family. How to tell my mother, who had just 2 days earlier declared that I would die poor like always, that I was now worth more money than she had ever imagined. The irony was almost too much to process. The woman who had criticized my choices, who had made me feel worthless for dedicating my life to helping others, was about to discover that those same choices had caught the attention of a relative who valued character over financial success. As I sat there in that parking lot watching children stream into the building where I had found my purpose, I realized that Edmund Whitfield had given me more than money. He had given me validation. For years, I had wondered if my mother was right, if I was foolish to choose service over salary, compassion over competition. Now I knew. The persons whose opinion ultimately mattered most had been watching all along, and he had chosen me not despite my lifestyle, but because of it. The difficult part would be navigating what came next, the family dynamics that would shift overnight, the relationships that would change when people learned about inheritance, the responsibility of managing resources I had never imagined having. But sitting there in my cracked windshield Honda with legal documents that would change everything scattered on the passenger seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. My choices mattered. My work had value. And the person who had spent 2 years observing our family had seen something in me that my own mother had missed entirely. Tomorrow I would have to make decisions about lawyers and financial advisors and investment strategies. I would have to figure out how to transform this incredible gift into something meaningful and lasting. Tonight, though, I just wanted to sit with the knowledge that someone had been watching, Someone had seen my true worth, and someone had decided that the girl who chose helping others over helping herself deserved to have the resources to help everyone. Growing up in the Donovan household meant living under a microscope of perpetual evaluation. My mother, Patricia, had turned comparison into an art form, measuring every achievement, every choice, every breath against some invisible standard that seemed to shift depending on her mood and the social circles she desperately wanted to impress. The house on Maple Street had been my grandmother's before it became ours. 3 stories of Victorian architecture with bay windows and crown molding that required constant maintenance we couldn't afford. Patricia refused to sell it after my father died, clinging to it like proof that we still belonged to a better class of people, even as the paint peeled and the roof leaked during heavy rains. My childhood memories were punctuated by Patricia's running commentary on my shortcomings. While other mothers might encourage their daughters to dream big, mine was already calculating the ways those dreams would disappoint everyone. When I was 12 and announced I wanted to be a teacher, Patricia's response was swift and cutting. "Teachers don't make money, Rachel. Do you want to struggle your whole life like Mrs. Henderson next door? Look at her car. Look at her clothes. Is that the life you want?" When I showed interest in art, she enrolled me in piano lessons instead because musicians can at least perform at weddings and make some money on weekends. When I excelled in English and wanted to join the school newspaper, she pushed me toward business classes because writing is a hobby, not a career. My sister, Jessica, 3 years younger, learned early to navigate Patricia's expectations more successfully. Jessica was naturally good at the things our mother valued. She was prettier in the conventional way Patricia appreciated, more interested in fashion and social status, more willing to pursue boys from families with money. Patricia would beam when Jessica brought home report cards full of A's in subjects like economics and marketing. "Look at your sister, Rachel. She understands what it takes to succeed in this world. She's not going to waste her time on charity work and feel-good nonsense." The comparison became a constant soundtrack to my adolescence. Jessica's achievements were celebrated with dinner out and new clothes. Mine were acknowledged with concern about my future financial security. When Jessica won homecoming court in high school, Patricia threw a party. When I won a statewide essay contest about social justice, she worried that I was developing unrealistic expectations about changing the world.
My father, Michael, had been different. Quieter than Patricia, more thoughtful, more interested in books than bank accounts. He worked as a high school history teacher, a career choice that Patricia never let him forget was beneath his potential. She had married him believing he would eventually move into administration, maybe become a principal or superintendent. When he remained content in his classroom, teaching teenagers about the Civil War and the Great Depression, she treated it as a personal betrayal. Dad understood my interests in ways Patricia never would. He was the one who took me to the public library every Saturday morning, who encouraged my volunteer work at the local food bank, who listened when I talked about wanting to help people rather than just make money. He would sit at the kitchen table, helping me with homework, while Patricia watched television in the living room, occasionally calling out reminders about the importance of practical career choices. "Your daughter thinks she's going to save the world," Patricia would say to him, her voice carrying a tone that made saving the world sound like the most foolish ambition imaginable. "Maybe she will," Michael would reply quietly, never rising to the argument, but never backing down from his support of my dreams. He died of a heart attack when I was 16. Sudden, unexpected, devastating in ways that went beyond the obvious loss. Without his gentle counterbalance, Patricia's voice became the only voice in the house. Her perspective on success, on worth, on the practical realities of life became the dominant narrative, and I had no defender against her increasingly harsh assessments of my choices. The funeral was the first time I saw Patricia cry, and also the first time I understood that her criticism of his career had masked a deeper fear. She had been terrified of financial insecurity her entire adult life, and his death confirmed every anxiety she had carried about the instability of choosing passion over profit. Standing beside his grave, she whispered to me through tears, "This is what happens when you don't plan for the future, Rachel. This is what happens when you think love is enough."
I won a partial scholarship to Ohio State, enough to cover tuition but not living expenses. Patricia made it clear that any financial support from her would come with conditions. I could study education if I insisted, but I also had to take business classes. I could volunteer, but not if it interfered with internships that might lead to paying jobs. Every semester, she would review my grades and my activities, calculating whether I was making choices that would lead to financial stability or setting myself up for the same struggles she had endured. Jessica, meanwhile, was thriving in high school. She had started dating Trevor Walsh, whose family owned a successful chain of hardware stores throughout Ohio. Patricia loved Trevor, loved his family's money, loved the way he treated Jessica like a prize to be won. When they talked about their future together, Patricia would get a dreamy look in her eyes, as if Jessica's potential marriage to wealth could somehow redeem the family's economic standing. During my sophomore year of college, I changed my major to social work, a decision that triggered the worst fight Patricia and I had ever had. She drove up to campus unannounced, found me in the student union, and delivered a lecture that could be heard 3 tables away. Social work, Rachel? You want to spend your life dealing with other people's problems for food stamp wages? Have you completely lost your mind? Do you see how I've struggled since your father died? Do you want that life for yourself? I tried to explain that I had found my calling, that working with families in crisis felt meaningful in ways that business courses never had. I told her about the internship I had started at a family services agency, how rewarding it felt to help children who were facing the same kinds of challenges I remembered from my own childhood. Patricia's response was swift and final. If you insist on throwing your life away, don't expect me to support it. You can pay your own way from now on. She meant it. The monthly checks stopped. I took out additional student loans, picked up extra work-study hours, and spent my junior and senior years eating ramen noodles while Jessica continued to enjoy the financial support that came with making choices Patricia approved of. The contrast became even starker during my senior year when Jessica announced her engagement to Trevor. Patricia threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm I had never seen her display for any of my accomplishments. She spent money we didn't have on engagement parties and bridal showers, justifying the expense by explaining that Jessica was marrying into the kind of family that expected certain standards. When I graduated with my social work degree, Patricia attended the ceremony but spent most of it talking about Jessica's upcoming wedding. My diploma represented 4 years of struggle and determination to pursue meaningful work despite financial obstacles. To Patricia, it represented confirmation that I had chosen a path that would never lead to the security and status she valued above all else. After college, I moved to Columbus and started working at the Riverside Community Center for $28,000 a year. The work was exactly what I had hoped for, challenging and meaningful, serving families that reminded me of my own childhood struggles. I developed after-school programs, coordinated with social services, and built relationships with children who needed adults in their lives who believed in their potential, regardless of their economic circumstances.
Patricia's reaction to my career choice was predictable and relentless. Every family gathering became an opportunity to highlight my financial limitations and compare them unfavorably to Jessica's increasingly comfortable lifestyle. Jessica and Trevor had bought a house in the suburbs, complete with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. Trevor had expanded his family's business into neighboring states, and they were clearly prosperous in ways that delighted Patricia. When they announced Jessica's first pregnancy, Patricia began planning for grandchildren who would grow up with every advantage she felt I was denying my own future family. Meanwhile, my apartment was a 1-bedroom unit in an older building where the heat sometimes didn't work and the parking lot flooded during heavy rains. I drove the same Honda I had bought used during my senior year of college, and my wardrobe consisted primarily of clothes from discount stores and thrift stops. The monthly family dinners became exercises in endurance. Patricia would spend the first hour updating everyone on Jessica's latest achievements and acquisitions, then turn her attention to my apparent lack of progress in life. When was I going to find a husband? When was I going to pursue a career with advancement opportunities? When was I going to stop wasting my education on work that would never provide financial security? The criticism was constant, but it was delivered with the kind of loving concern that made it difficult to argue against. Patricia wasn't trying to be cruel, she insisted. She was trying to help me see reality before it was too late to make better choices. Your biological clock is ticking, Rachel. You're 32 years old with no husband, no house, no savings account worth mentioning. What happens when you get sick? What happens when you get old? Who's going to take care of you? Over the years, Patricia had perfected a subtle form of emotional manipulation that left me questioning my own judgment while never quite crossing the line into obvious abuse. She would praise my compassion while lamenting my impracticality. She would acknowledge my intelligence while wondering why I couldn't apply it to more profitable pursuits. She would express love and concern while making it clear that my choices reflected poorly on her as a mother. The most painful part was how she had trained the rest of the family to view me through the same lens. Jessica had absorbed Patricia's perspective so completely that she genuinely believed she was being helpful when she offered to set me up with Trevor's divorced friends or suggested I consider going back to school for an MBA. Even extended family members had learned to ask about my work with the kind of polite interest reserved for hobbies rather than careers. At family weddings and funerals, cousins would update each other on promotions and home purchases and vacation plans, then turn to me with gentle questions about whether I was still doing that community work and had I given any thought to finding something more stable. The cumulative effect was a constant sense that I was living my life wrong, that my choices were selfish and impractical, that my dedication to helping others was really just an excuse for avoiding the real work of building financial security and social status. By the time I reached my mid-30s, I had learned to dread family gatherings, to brace myself for the inevitable conversations about my limitations, to smile and nod while Patricia delivered her assessments of my failure to launch into proper adulthood. The monthly family dinners had become ritualistic confirmations of my inadequacy. Patricia would set the table with the good china that had belonged to my grandmother, prepare elaborate meals that demonstrated her domestic skills, and then spend the evening cataloging all the ways my life fell short of reasonable expectations. It was during one of these dinners, just 2 days before the inheritance call, that Patricia had delivered her most cutting assessment yet. We had been discussing Jessica's recent promotion at the marketing firm where she worked part-time, flexible hours that allowed her to be home with her children while still contributing to the family's already comfortable income. Jessica knows how to balance everything, Patricia had said, serving herself another portion of the roast she had spent all day preparing. She understands that being a good mother doesn't mean sacrificing your family's financial future. She's practical. Then Patricia had turned her attention to me, sitting across from her in the same chair I had occupied at family dinners for over 30 years, wearing a blouse I had bought on clearance, and trying to explain why my work at the community center mattered despite its obvious financial limitations. That's when she had delivered the words that would echo in my mind for days afterward. "You'll die poor, like always, Rachel, just like your father did. Some people are born winners, and some people are born to struggle. You've always been the latter." The worst part wasn't the cruelty of the statement. The worst part was how much of me believed it might be true. For 3 days after meeting with Thomas Morrison, I carried the inheritance secret like a stone in my chest. Every conversation felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every interaction with my coworkers took on a surreal quality as I wondered how they would react when they learned their colleague who brought lunch in brown paper bags was now worth more than most of them would earn in their lifetimes. The hardest part was continuing to function normally at the community center. Wednesday morning, I sat through a budget meeting where we discussed cutting the art supplies program because we couldn't afford the additional $50 per month. Nancy Chen, our director, apologized profusely as she explained that 3 of our major donors had reduced their contributions due to their own financial difficulties.
I'm sorry, Rachel. I know how much the kids love your art therapy sessions. Maybe we can revisit this in the spring if our funding situation improves. I nodded and took notes like any other day while knowing I could write a check to fund the art program for the next 20 years without noticing the expense. The disconnect was overwhelming. Here were people I respected, struggling to serve children who desperately needed our programs, while I sat quietly on information that could transform everything. After the meeting, I walked to my office and closed the door. The legal documents were locked in my desk drawer, but I could feel their presence like a heartbeat. $12 million. The number had lost all meaning through repetition, becoming just sounds without substance. I pulled out my phone and stared at my mother's contact information. Patricia had sent a text message the previous evening asking if I wanted to join her and Jessica for lunch on Saturday to discuss Jessica's plans for redecorating her kitchen. The casual assumption that I would be available, that my schedule was flexible enough to accommodate their suburban social calendar, suddenly felt different. Instead of responding to Patricia's text, I called Jessica directly. Jessica answered on the third ring, her voice bright with the casual confidence of someone whose biggest concern was choosing between granite and quartz countertops. "Rachel, Mom said she texted you about lunch Saturday. Can you make it? We're meeting at that new place in Westerville, the one with the cute outdoor seating." The restaurant she mentioned was the kind of place where entrees cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. I had learned to review menus online before family outings, choosing the least expensive options, and pretending I wasn't that hungry when my salad arrived alongside their elaborate meals. "Jessica, I need to tell you something important. Can you talk privately?" There was a pause, probably as she moved to a different room away from her children. "What's wrong? You sound strange." "I'm fine. Actually, I'm more than fine. Something incredible has happened, but I need you to promise you won't tell Mom until I'm ready." Another pause, longer this time. Jessica wasn't accustomed to me having news that required secrecy or advanced preparation. "Okay, I promise. What is it?" I told her everything. The phone call from Morrison, the meeting at the law office, Edmund Whitfield's letter, the staggering amount of money that was now legally mine. Jessica listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Normally she would pepper conversations with questions and comments, but she remained silent until I finished. When I stopped talking, the silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Jessica, are you there?" "I'm here. I can't process this. $12 million? Are you sure this isn't some kind of scam?" I had wondered the same thing, but Morrison's law firm was established and reputable. I had researched them thoroughly before signing any documents. "It's real, Jessica. I have the paperwork. I've spoken to the estate administrator in Seattle. Edmund Whitfield was our great-uncle, Grandma's brother who left Ohio before we were born. He built a successful tech company and decided to leave his fortune to me." "But why do you?" Jessica's tone wasn't accusatory, just genuinely confused. "I mean, none of us really knew him. Why not divide it equally or leave it to Curity?" I explained about the private investigators, about Edmund's interest in observing family dynamics, about his focus on character and how people treated those with less fortune. He was watching us, Jessica, for 2 years. He saw how Mom treats me at family dinners. He knew about my work at the community center, about the financial struggles, about the way I'm dismissed because I chose service over salary. Jessica was quiet again, processing implications I could only imagine. "So, what are you going to do?" That was the question I had been wrestling with since leaving Morrison's office. The money created possibilities I had never considered, but it also created responsibilities and relationship challenges that felt overwhelming. Thursday evening, I made my choice. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or the right words, I would simply tell the truth at the next family dinner. No dramatic revelations or prepared speeches, just honest conversation about what happened and what it meant. But first, I needed to take one concrete action that would make the inheritance real to me, not just numbers on legal documents. Friday morning, I walked into Nancy's office at the community center with a proposal that had kept me awake most of the night.
Nancy, I want to discuss something with you, but I need you to keep it confidential until I say otherwise.
She looked up from her computer with the expression of someone preparing for bad news, probably assuming I was about to resign or request a leave of absence. I want to make a donation to the center, a substantial donation that would allow us to expand our programs significantly. Her expression shifted from concern to confusion. Rachel, that's very generous, but I know your financial situation. You don't need to feel pressured to contribute more than you already do through your volunteer hours. I understand why you'd think that, but my circumstances have changed dramatically. I'm prepared to donate $2 million to establish a permanent endowment for the community center. Nancy stared at me without blinking for nearly 30 seconds. Rachel, did you say $2 million? Yes. The donation would fund expanded after-school programs, summer camps, college scholarships, facility improvements, and ensure stable salaries for all staff members. I explained about the inheritance, about Edmund's wishes that the money be used to help others, about my desire to transform the community center into a model program that could serve hundreds of children instead of the 37 we currently accommodated. Nancy cried. She actually cried sitting behind her desk while I explained how the endowment would work and what it could accomplish. Rachel, this is life-changing, not just for the center, but for every child we'll be able to serve. Are you absolutely certain about this? I was certain. For the first time since learning about the inheritance, I felt completely clear about a decision. This was exactly what Edmund had hoped for when he chose to leave his fortune to someone who understood the value of helping others. We spent the next 2 hours planning how the donation would be structured, what legal arrangements needed to be made, and how we would announce the expansion to our families and the community. When I left Nancy's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in days. The money had started to feel real, not just as a personal windfall, but as a tool for creating change. Saturday morning, I prepared for the family lunch with an attention to detail that surprised me. I chose my best outfit, a navy dress I had bought for job interviews 2 years earlier. I did my hair carefully and applied makeup with the precision of someone preparing for an important occasion. The restaurant Jessica had chosen was busy with weekend lunch crowds, families celebrating graduations and anniversaries. I arrived first and requested a quiet table where we could talk without being overheard by neighboring diners. Patricia arrived precisely on time, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her jewelry chosen to complement her expensive handbag. Jessica came in a few minutes later, looking nervous in a way that suggested she had been thinking about our phone conversation all week. They ordered elaborate meals, while I selected a simple pasta dish, following the pattern we had established over years of family dining. But this time, the financial disparity felt temporary rather than permanent. Patricia spent the first 20 minutes updating me on Jessica's kitchen renovation plans and asking detailed questions about my work schedule that seemed designed to highlight how much free time I had compared to Jessica's busy life managing career and family responsibilities. You're lucky to have such a flexible job, Rachel. Jessica barely has time to breathe between the children's activities and Trevor's business obligations. I listened to the familiar refrain, but for the first time, it didn't sting. Instead, I felt curious about how Patricia would react when she learned that my flexible job was about to become optional rather than necessary. When the server brought our entrees, I decided it was time for me to speak. Mom, Jessica, I have something important to tell you both. Patricia looked up from her salmon, probably expecting an announcement about a new volunteer project or a minor promotion at the community center. I've recently learned that I've inherited a significant amount of money from our great-uncle, Edmund Whitfield,
The silence was immediate and complete. Patricia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Jessica, who had promised to let me break the news myself, focused intently on her salad. "Who is Edmund Whitfield?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the tone she used when she suspected someone of making up stories. "He was Grandma's brother. He left Ohio decades ago and built a successful business in Seattle. He passed away recently and left me his estate." "How much money?" Patricia's question was direct, bypassing any pretense of polite interest. $12 million.
Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet that surrounded our table, as if other diners had somehow sensed the magnitude of the conversation happening in their vicinity. "That's impossible," Patricia said flatly. "We would have known if we had a wealthy relative. Someone would have mentioned it." I explained about Edmund's estrangement from the family, about the private investigators he had hired, about his specific interest in observing how family members treated each other. "He was watching us, Mom, for 2 years. He saw how we interact at family dinners, how I'm treated because of my career choices, how you measure success and worth." Patricia's expression shifted through several emotions quickly. Disbelief gave way to calculation, then to something that looked almost like fear. "What do you mean he was watching us?" The moment had arrived when I would need to be completely honest about what Edmund had observed and what his letter had revealed about our family dynamics. Patricia's face had gone completely white. She gripped her water glass so tightly I worried it might shatter in her hand. The question about Edmund watching us hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. I pulled Edmund's letter from my purse and placed it on the table between the three of us. The handwritten pages looked fragile under the restaurant's bright lighting, but the words they contained were about to prove more powerful than any of us had anticipated. "He hired private investigators, Mom. They observed our family interactions for over 2 years. They documented conversations, behavior patterns, how we treated each other when we thought no one was watching." Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What kind of conversations?" I opened the letter and read aloud the paragraph that had kept me awake for nights. "I know how you have been treated by those who should have supported you most. I know the words that have been said, the dismissals you have endured, the way your worth has been questioned because your bank account was smaller than others deemed appropriate." Patricia's breathing had become shallow, rapid. She kept glancing around the restaurant as if expecting to see investigators at nearby tables, still watching, still documenting her reactions. "This is insane," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "People can't just spy on families like that. It's illegal." "Actually, it's not illegal when conducted by licensed investigators observing behavior in public spaces and family gatherings," I replied, having researched this exact question with Morrison's help. Edmund was very careful to stay within legal boundaries. Jessica had gone silent, processing implications that were clearly making her uncomfortable. She had been present for many of the conversations Edmund's investigators had documented. She had heard Patricia's criticisms, had sometimes participated in them herself. "What else do they know?" Patricia asked, and I heard something new in her voice. Fear, but also calculation, as if she was already trying to determine how much damage control might be necessary. I explained about the surveillance reports Morrison had shown me. The investigators had documented specific family dinners, recording conversations about my career choices, my financial situation, my prospects for marriage and children. They had noted Patricia's pattern of comparing me unfavorably to Jessica, her comments about my father's similar lack of financial ambition, her predictions about my future struggles. But they had also documented things I hadn't known about. According to the investigative reports, Patricia's own financial situation was far more precarious than she had ever admitted. The Victorian house she refused to sell was mortgaged to nearly its full value. She had been living on credit cards for the past 3 years, maintaining her lifestyle through debt rather than income. The investigators had discovered that Patricia's monthly social activities, her expensive clothing, even her elaborate holiday gifts were funded by borrowed money.
She had been projecting financial stability while drowning in obligations she couldn't meet. "Mom," I said gently, "the investigators also looked into your financial situation. They know about the mortgage, the credit card debt, the fact that you've been struggling since Dad died." Patricia's composure cracked visibly. Her carefully maintained facade of prosperity began crumbling as she realized that her own economic vulnerabilities had been exposed while she was criticizing mine. "How dare they? How dare anyone investigate my personal finances? That's private information." Jessica looked between us with a growing alarm. "What debt? Mom, you told me the house was paid off. You said Dad's life insurance covered everything." The truth came out in fragments over the next 20 minutes. Patricia had used the life insurance money to maintain their lifestyle for the first few years after Dad's death, but it had run out long ago. Rather than downsize or find employment, she had mortgaged the house and accumulated credit card debt to preserve the appearance of financial security.
She had been especially concerned about maintaining this appearance in front of Jessica and Trevor's family, who represented the kind of social connections she desperately wanted to preserve. The thought of admitting financial struggles to people she was trying to impress had been unbearable. "I couldn't let people see me as a failure," Patricia said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I couldn't let them know that Michael's death left us with nothing substantial. What would people think?" Jessica reached across the table to take Patricia's hand. "Mom, we would have helped. Trevor and I could have assisted with the house payments or helped you find a smaller place." But Patricia shook her head firmly. "I couldn't take money from you and Trevor. You have your own family to think about. Besides, what would his parents think if they knew your mother needed financial assistance?" The irony was overwhelming. Patricia had spent years criticizing my financial choices while hiding her own economic desperation. She had lectured me about practical career decisions while funding her lifestyle through debt. She had predicted I would struggle financially while concealing her own ongoing financial crisis. The investigators hadn't limited their research to our immediate family. They had also examined the broader network of relatives and family friends who attended our gatherings. What they discovered painted a picture of a family system built on performance and deception, rather than genuine connection. Jessica's marriage to Trevor, which Patricia celebrated as a triumph of practical thinking, had its own complications. Trevor's family hardware business was struggling due to competition from large retail chains. The prosperity they displayed was largely maintained through business loans and personal debt, much like Patricia's situation. Even more revealing was the investigators' documentation of conversations between Patricia and other family members. She had been discussing my supposed financial failures with aunts and cousins, painting me as irresponsible and naive, while positioning herself as the concerned mother, trying to guide her wayward daughter toward better choices. These conversations had shaped the entire extended family's perception of me. Relatives I saw only at weddings and funerals had been hearing for years about my poor judgment, my unrealistic career expectations, my failure to secure financial stability through marriage or professional advancement. The investigators had recorded phone conversations where Patricia expressed frustration about my choices to her sister Margaret, my aunt who lived in Cleveland. In these calls, Patricia had speculated that I was deliberately choosing poverty as some kind of rebellion against family values, that I was too proud to accept help or guidance, that I would eventually come crawling back when reality finally hit. But Margaret's responses had surprised everyone, including the investigators. She had consistently defended my choices, pointing out that meaningful work was valuable even when it wasn't financially rewarding, suggesting that Patricia's criticism might be driving me away from the family rather than helping me make better decisions. "I didn't know Aunt Margaret had been defending me," I said quietly. Patricia had never mentioned these conversations, never indicated that anyone in the family questioned her assessment of my life choices. "Margaret always thought I was too hard on you," Patricia admitted. "She said I was repeating the same mistakes my own mother made with me."
This revelation opened a door to family history I had never fully understood. Patricia's mother, my grandmother, had apparently been equally critical of Patricia's choices when she was young. Grandmother had disapproved of Patricia's marriage to a teacher, had predicted financial struggles, had constantly compared her to more successful siblings and cousins. The investigators had even uncovered this generational pattern, noting in their reports that Patricia's treatment of me mirrored her own mother's treatment of her. The cycle of criticism and comparison had been passed down like an heirloom no one wanted, but everyone inherited. Jessica was processing this information with visible shock. She had always seen Patricia as confident and successful, the family member who had everything figured out. Learning about the debt, the performance, the generational pattern of criticism was reshaping her understanding of our entire family dynamic. "So Edmund saw all of this?" she asked. "The debt, the fake prosperity, the way Mom talks about Rachel behind her back?" "He saw everything," I confirmed, "and he saw how I responded to it. He watched me continue showing up to family dinners despite the criticism, continue working with underprivileged children despite the financial limitations, continue treating everyone with respect even when that respect wasn't returned." Patricia had stopped crying, but her face remained pale. She was beginning to understand that Edmund's choice to leave me the inheritance wasn't random or sentimental. It was based on careful observation of our family dynamics over an extended period of time. "He chose you because you were the only one who wasn't performing," she said quietly. "You were the only one being authentic." The weight of this realization settled over our table like fog. Everything Patricia had criticized about my life choices, everything she had seen as evidence of poor judgment or lack of ambition, had actually been the qualities that impressed Edmund most. My commitment to service over salary, my willingness to live modestly while helping others, my refusal to compromise my values for financial gain, these weren't character flaws to be corrected. They were character strengths worthy of reward. The server approached our table tentatively, probably sensing the intensity of our conversation and wondering if we needed anything. We had barely touched our meals, too absorbed in revelations to eat. Patricia excused herself to go to the restroom, leaving Jessica and me alone at the table for the first time since I had shared the inheritance news. "Rachel, I owe you an apology," Jessica said immediately. "I've been part of this. I've participated in Mom's criticism of your choices without really thinking about what that meant. I've taken her perspective as truth without questioning it." I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You didn't know about the surveillance, about Edmund's observations. None of us understood the bigger picture. But I should have defended you more often. I should have questioned why Mom was so critical of work that clearly mattered to you. I should have seen that her concerns weren't really about your well-being." When Patricia returned from the restroom, her makeup had been repaired, but her demeanor had fundamentally changed. The confident, critical mother who had dominated family conversations for decades had been replaced by someone who looked smaller, more uncertain, more human. "What happens now?" she asked simply. "Now," I said, "we figure out how to move forward with honesty instead of performance. We learn to have relationships based on who we actually are, rather than who we think we should be. And we break the cycle of criticism and comparison that's been poisoning our family for generations." The inheritance had given me more than money. It had given me proof that my choices had value, that my character had been seen and appreciated by someone whose opinion mattered. Most importantly, it had revealed the truth about family dynamics I had accepted as normal, but were actually deeply dysfunctional. The question now was whether we could use these revelations to build something healthier, or whether the weight of exposed secrets would prove too heavy for our relationships to bear. The ride back to Patricia's house was unlike any car trip we had ever taken as a family. Jessica followed us in her SUV, while I sat in the passenger seat of Patricia's sedan, both of us staring straight ahead as the familiar streets of our neighborhood rolled past. The silence wasn't comfortable or peaceful. It was the heavy quiet that follows an earthquake, when everyone is still assessing the damage and afraid to speak the destruction into reality. Patricia's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Every few blocks she would start to say something, then stop herself, leaving half-formed words hanging in the air between us. Finally, as we pulled into her driveway, she spoke. "Your great-uncle must have thought we were terrible people." The statement wasn't self-pity or a request for reassurance. It was a flat acknowledgement of what the investigation reports had revealed about our family dynamics. Patricia was beginning to understand that Edmund's careful observations had captured behavior she probably wished could remain private forever. "He didn't think you were terrible," so I replied carefully. "He thought you were human. Flawed, but human." We sat in the parked car for several minutes while Jessica pulled in behind us. Through the windshield, I could see the Victorian house that had been the center of so much financial stress for Patricia, its paint peeling slightly around the window frames, its roof showing signs of age she couldn't afford to address. Inside the house, we gathered around the same kitchen table where Patricia had delivered countless lectures about my life choices over the years. But now, the power dynamic had shifted completely. The woman who had always controlled family conversations through criticism and comparison was about to face questions she had never expected to answer. Jessica arrived carrying a folder she had retrieved from her car. I didn't know what it contained until she spread the contents across the table. Bank statements, loan documents, correspondence from creditors that Patricia had apparently been sharing with Jessica for months. "Mom, you've been asking me and Trevor for financial help while criticizing Rachel for not making enough money. These credit card statements show minimum payments on over $40,000 in debt." Patricia's face flushed red. "Those were temporary difficulties. I've been managing them responsibly." "Temporary difficulties that have been going on for 3 years, Jessica continued. "You took out a second mortgage on the house last year, you've been paying for groceries with credit cards, and through all of this, you've been telling Rachel she needs to be more practical about money." I studied the documents Jessica had laid out, seeing our family's financial reality for the first time. Patricia hadn't just been struggling since Dad's death. She had been engaged in an elaborate performance designed to maintain social status she couldn't afford, while using that same performance as justification for criticizing my supposedly impractical choices.
"The investigative reports were accurate," I said quietly. "You've been projecting financial security while accumulating debt, then using your supposed expertise about money to judge my career decisions." Patricia stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the backyard where Jessica and I had played as children. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. Whether from anger or distress, I couldn't determine. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she said without turning around. "After your father died, everyone expected me to fall apart, to lose the house, to become another widow who couldn't manage on her own. I couldn't let that happen." Jessica had more documents in her folder, papers I hadn't expected to see. She had apparently been investigating our family history since our phone conversation about the inheritance, trying to understand the patterns Edmund's surveillance had identified. "I called Aunt Margaret after you told me about the inheritance," Jessica said, spreading out copies of old letters and family photographs. "I asked her about Grandma's treatment of Mom, about the family dynamics when we were children. What she had discovered painted a picture of dysfunction that went back multiple generations.
Our grandmother had been equally critical of Patricia's choices, constantly comparing her to more successful siblings, predicting financial failure when Patricia married a teacher instead of pursuing someone with better career prospects. But more significantly, Margaret had shared information about our great-grandfather's treatment of his own children, including Edmund and our grandmother. The family pattern of criticism and comparison had been established decades before any of us were born. Edmund left home at 18 because his father constantly told him he'd never amount to anything, Jessica explained. He built his entire fortune to prove his family wrong, but then spent years watching from a distance as the same toxic patterns continued through subsequent generations. This revelation reframed Edmund's surveillance activities completely. He hadn't been conducting idle observation of distant relatives. He had been looking for evidence that someone in our family had broken free from the cycle of criticism and comparison that had damaged his own relationship with his siblings. Patricia turned back from the window, tears streaming down her face. He was watching to see if any of us had learned to be different than our parents. Exactly, I said. And what he saw was that I had somehow managed to choose service over selfishness, to maintain kindness despite being criticized for it, to stay committed to helping others even when that commitment was dismissed as impractical. With this context established, Jessica began asking Patricia questions that went beyond financial deception. She wanted to understand how consciously Patricia had been perpetuating the critical patterns she had experienced from her own mother. "Mom, did you know you were repeating what Grandma did to you?" Jessica asked directly. "When you criticized Rachel's career choices, when you compared us constantly, when you predicted she'd struggle financially, did you realize you were using the same words your mother used about Dad?" Patricia sank back into her chair, looking older than I had ever seen her appear. The careful makeup and styling that usually made her seem ageless couldn't disguise the weight of decades of unexamined behavior. I thought I was protecting her. I thought if I was honest about the realities of financial insecurity, she would make better choices than I did. "But you weren't honest about financial realities," I pointed out. "You were performing financial success while accumulating debt, then using that performance as credibility for criticizing my supposedly poor financial judgment." Patricia covered her face with her hands. "I became everything I hated about my own mother. I became critical and controlling and impossible to please. And I convinced myself it was for your own good." The admission hung in the air like smoke. 3 generations of women who had used criticism as a twisted form of love, each believing she was protecting her daughter from mistakes while actually perpetuating cycles of emotional harm. For the first time in our adult relationship, Patricia began speaking to me without the filter of judgment or comparison. She talked about her terror after Dad's death, about feeling unprepared for widowhood, about the social pressures she felt to maintain appearances within our community. She explained how Dad's teacher salary had always been a source of anxiety for her, not because they couldn't live on it, but because she worried constantly about what would happen if he became ill or died young. Her criticism of his career choice had been rooted in fear, not disappointment. "I loved your father, but I was terrified of the financial vulnerability that came with his profession. When he died, all my worst fears were realized. I had no substantial savings, no career of my own, no plan for supporting myself."
But instead of helping me make informed decisions, you made me feel worthless for choosing meaningful work over financial security, I said. You turned my compassion into a character flaw. Jessica leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "And Mom, you made Rachel feel like she had to choose between family approval and personal integrity. You created a situation where she could either be true to herself or be accepted by us, but not both." Patricia looked directly at me for the first time since we had returned from the restaurant. Her face was puffy from crying, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her composure completely abandoned. "Rachel, I owe you an apology that's 20 years overdue. I've been wrong about everything.
Your choices weren't impractical or naive. They were principled and brave. You've been helping children who needed advocates, while I've been performing prosperity I couldn't afford." She paused, struggling to continue. "Edmund saw something in you that I was too afraid to recognize. He saw character and integrity and genuine commitment to serving others. He saw qualities that mattered more than bank account balances or social status." The apology felt genuine, but I wasn't ready to accept it without addressing the damage her behavior had caused over the years. "Mom, your criticism didn't just hurt my feelings. It made me question my own judgment. It made me wonder if my values were wrong, if my desire to help people was selfish somehow. It took years of therapy to understand that your fears about money weren't objective assessments of my life choices." Patricia nodded, absorbing the impact of her behavior in ways I had never seen her do before. "I understand why Edmund chose you. You stayed true to your principles, despite pressure to abandon them. You remained kind, despite being criticized for it. You chose to help others, even when helping others was portrayed as foolish." Jessica reached across the table to take both our hands. "This is what Edmund wanted, isn't it? He wanted us to have this conversation. He wanted the truth to come out so we could build something healthier." I looked around the kitchen table, where we had shared so many meals filled with criticism and comparison, and realized that Edmund's gift hadn't just been financial. He had given us the information we needed to break generational patterns of dysfunction. The money would allow me to help more children than I had ever imagined possible, but this conversation, painful as it was, might help us become a family that supported each other's authentic selves, rather than demanding performance of success we couldn't actually afford. Patricia squeezed my hand tightly. "I don't know if I can change decades of behavior overnight, but I want to try. I want to learn how to be the mother you deserved to have all along." For the first time in 20 years, I believed she meant it. 3 weeks after the kitchen table confrontation, I was sitting in Thomas Morrison's law office again, but this time with a completely different agenda. Instead of learning about an unexpected inheritance, I was meeting with a team of financial advisors to discuss how to structure my charitable giving and personal investments in ways that would honor Edmund's intentions. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Patricia and I were still navigating conversations that felt foreign after decades of established patterns. Jessica was struggling to redefine her role as the family mediator now that she understood how much she had enabled Patricia's critical behavior toward me. But change was happening in concrete ways that surprised all of us. Patricia had enrolled in financial counseling and was working with a credit card consolidation specialist to address her credit card obligations. More importantly, she had started therapy with Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, a counselor who specialized in helping people break generational cycles of emotional dysfunction. "I never realized how much I was repeating my mother's mistakes," Patricia told me during one of our weekly phone calls that had replaced the monthly family dinners. "Dr. Rodriguez is helping me understand why I thought criticism was the same thing as concern." These phone conversations were still awkward sometimes, both of us learning how to talk without the familiar structure of judgment and defense, but they were happening regularly, which represented progress neither of us had expected. The $2 million donation to the Riverside Community Center had been finalized, and the transformation was already beginning. Nancy Chen had hired an architect to design expanded facilities that would serve over 200 children instead of our current 37. But more than the physical expansion, the emotional impact on our current families was profound. When we announced the new scholarship program that would provide full college funding for graduates of our after-school program, several parents cried during the meeting. Mrs. Martinez, whose son Carlos had been attending our program for 3 years, approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "Miss Rachel, Carlos talks about college like it's actually possible, instead of just a dream. You've given these children hope they didn't have before." The interaction reminded me why Edmund's gift mattered beyond the personal vindication it had provided. He had seen that my commitment to helping children wasn't just idealistic sentiment, it was practical work that created real opportunities for families who otherwise wouldn't have access to them.
Morrison had encouraged me to visit Edmund's house in Seattle, both to understand more about the man who had changed my life and to make decisions about the property I now owned. The flight was my first trip outside Ohio in over 5 years, another reminder of how limited my world had become due to financial constraints. The house overlooking Puget Sound was nothing like what I had expected. Instead of the ostentatious mansion I had imagined, it was a modest but beautifully designed home filled with books, artwork, and photographs that told the story of Edmund's life after leaving our family. His housekeeper, Maria Santos, had worked for him for 15 years and had agreed to stay through the transition period. She was the one who helped me understand Edmund's character in ways the legal documents never could. Mr. Edmund was lonely, she explained, as we walked through rooms that reflected a life of quiet contemplation rather than flashy success. He had money, yes, but he never forgot where he came from. He talked about your family often, wondered if anyone had grown up to be different than the generation that drove him away. She showed me Edmund's study, where he had kept detailed files not just on our family, but on dozens of charitable organizations he had supported over the years. The walls were covered with thank you letters from schools, hospitals, community centers, and scholarship recipients whose lives he had touched through anonymous donations. He always gave quietly, Maria said. He didn't want recognition or gratitude. He wanted to know his money was helping people who really needed it, people who would use it to help others. In his desk, I found a journal he had kept during the 2 years of family surveillance. The entries weren't cold investigative notes. They were the observations of a man who desperately wanted to reconnect with family, but needed to be sure he was giving his fortune to someone who would honor his values. March 15th. Watched Rachel volunteer at the food bank again today. She stayed 2 hours past her shift to help an elderly man fill out paperwork for assistance. Patricia would probably call this impractical, but it's exactly the kind of kindness our family used to value before we became so focused on appearances. August 3rd. Family dinner surveillance confirms the pattern. Patricia criticizes Rachel's career choice while wearing jewelry she can't afford. Jessica participates in the criticism without questioning its fairness. Rachel remains kind to both of them, despite being constantly dismissed. She's the only one who's authentic. Reading these entries, I understood that Edmund's gift hadn't been impulsive or sentimental. It had been a calculated investment in someone he believed would use resources wisely, because she had already proven her character in circumstances where kindness wasn't rewarded. Back in Columbus, I began making changes to my own life that went beyond managing the inheritance. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't constantly worried about money. This freedom allowed me to focus on relationships and experiences I had been too stressed to prioritize. I enrolled in graduate courses in nonprofit management, not because I needed additional credentials, but because I wanted to understand how to maximize the impact of the resources I now controlled. I joined the board of directors for 3 local charities, bringing both financial support and hands-on experience to organizations that served vulnerable populations. But the most significant change was in my relationship with myself. Years of criticism had trained me to second-guess every decision, to question whether my values were realistic or naive. Edmund's letter had provided external validation, but the real work was learning to trust my own judgment again. Dr. Rebecca Kim, the therapist I had started seeing, helped me understand how deeply Patricia's criticism had affected my self-perception. You've spent decades believing that your compassion was a character flaw rather than a strength, she explained during one session. Part of your healing involves recognizing that Edmund saw qualities in you that your family had trained you to dismiss as impractical. The therapy sessions were helping me distinguish between healthy self-reflection and the constant self-doubt that had become second nature. I was learning to make decisions based on my own values, rather than anticipating criticism from others. Jessica's transformation was perhaps the most unexpected.
Learning about Patricia's financial deception and the generational patterns of criticism had forced her to examine her own behavior and choices more critically. She enrolled in financial planning classes and insisted that she and Trevor create transparent budgets and emergency funds rather than maintaining appearances they couldn't sustain. She also started questioning the social pressures within Trevor's family circle that had influenced many of their lifestyle decisions. "I realize I've been performing success just like Mom did," she told me during one of our new weekly coffee meetings. "Trevor and I were spending money on things we thought we should want, rather than things that actually mattered to us." She had also started volunteering at the community center, bringing her marketing skills to help us develop better communication strategies for reaching families who could benefit from our expanded programs. Most importantly, Jessica was learning to have conversations with her own children that focused on character development rather than achievement pressure. She was consciously working to break the cycle of criticism that had damaged multiple generations of our family.
Word of the inheritance had spread through our extended family network, creating reactions that ranged from genuine happiness to barely concealed envy. Aunt Margaret, who had apparently been defending my choices for years, was thrilled both about the financial windfall and about what it represented in terms of family validation. "I always knew you were special," she told me during a phone call. "Your great-uncle saw what the rest of us should have recognized years ago." But other relatives were struggling with the implications. Cousins who had participated in Patricia's criticism of my career choices were now awkwardly trying to reconnect, their sudden interest in my life transparently connected to my changed financial circumstances. Uncle Robert, Patricia's brother, called to suggest investment opportunities and business partnerships that would benefit his construction company. Cousin Linda, who had barely acknowledged me at family gatherings for years, suddenly wanted to involve me in her children's college planning. The inheritance had revealed which family relationships were based on genuine affection and which were transactional. While this was sometimes painful to recognize, it was also liberating to understand where I truly belonged in our extended family network. My role at the community center was evolving from direct service provider to strategic leader. With the endowment in place, we could hire additional staff members, expand programming, and develop innovative approaches to serving children and families in our community. But I was also beginning to envision broader applications for Edmund's resources. I started exploring partnerships with other community centers in Ohio, sharing successful program models and providing seed funding for expansion into underserved areas. The work felt like a natural progression from my original commitment to helping individual children to helping entire communities develop sustainable support systems. Edmund's gift had given me the ability to think bigger while staying grounded in the direct service work that had always motivated me. Nancy Chen, who had initially worried that my changed financial circumstances might distance me from the day-to-day realities of our family struggles, was relieved to see that the inheritance had actually deepened my commitment to the work rather than diminishing it. "You're still the same Rachel," she observed during one of our planning meetings. "You just have better tools now to accomplish what you've always wanted to do." The transformation was ongoing, with new challenges and opportunities emerging regularly. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt aligned between my values, my resources, and my relationships. Edmund hadn't just given me money, he had given me proof that authenticity and compassion were valuable qualities worth investing in, and the means to demonstrate that investment through service to others. Exactly 1 year after Thomas Morrison's phone call changed everything, I stood in the newly opened Edmund Whitfield Community Learning Center watching 300 children participate in programs that hadn't existed 12 months earlier. The converted warehouse had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility with computer labs, art studios, a library, and spaces designed specifically for the comprehensive family services we now offered. Carlos Martinez, the shy boy whose mother had cried when we announced the college scholarship program, was now a confident high school senior who volunteered as a tutor for younger children.
His acceptance letter to Ohio State's engineering program hung proudly on our achievement wall, alongside dozens of similar success stories that had emerged from Edmund's investment in authentic character over financial performance. The opening ceremony had attracted local media attention, but the moment that mattered most came when Maria Santos, Edmund's former housekeeper, who now directed the Seattle Memorial Foundation, read a passage from one of his journals. True wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you enable others to become. Patricia's transformation had been the most surprising element of this entire journey. The woman who once criticized my every choice now served on the center's advisory board, using her organizational skills to coordinate volunteer efforts and donor relations. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Rodriguez had helped her understand that financial anxiety had driven decades of destructive behavior patterns she'd inherited from her own mother. I spent so many years afraid of being poor that I forgot how to be rich in the things that actually matter, she told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings, which had replaced the formal family dinners that once felt like interrogations. Jessica's volunteer work had evolved into a part-time position managing our family outreach programs. Her marketing background proved invaluable for connecting with parents who were initially skeptical of services that seemed too good to be true. She had also begun documenting our family's generational patterns of criticism in a blog that helped other families recognize and break similar cycles. Mom's behavior wasn't malicious. It was learned. The beautiful thing about learned behaviors is that they can be unlearned and replaced with healthier patterns. Edmund's influence extended far beyond our immediate family situation. The foundation I'd established in his name was now funding similar community transformation projects in 8 states, each one guided by his principle of investing in character-driven individuals rather than traditional charity models.
Dr. Sarah Chen, a social work professor at Case Western Reserve University, had begun studying our model as part of her research on effective philanthropy. What makes the Whitfield approach unique, she explained during a presentation to nonprofit leaders, is the emphasis on long-term observation and character assessment rather than immediate need or traditional credentials. The surveillance methodology that had initially seemed invasive now appeared revolutionary. Other wealthy individuals were adopting similar approaches, hiring investigators not to spy on family members, but to identify community leaders whose authentic commitment to service warranted investment. The practice was becoming known as character-based philanthropy. The National Association of Social Workers had indeed honored me with their annual Excellence Award, but the recognition that meant most came from an unexpected source. The children and families we served had nominated me for the Jefferson Award for Public Service, citing not the financial resources I had brought to their community, but the consistency of care I demonstrated long before those resources existed. Miss Rachel believed in us when we had nothing to offer her except hope, wrote Maria Gonzalez, whose daughter now attended college on one of our scholarships. The money made new programs possible, but her heart made them meaningful. My role had evolved from direct service provider to systems change advocate. I was consulting with community centers nationwide, speaking at conferences about sustainable funding models, and developing training programs for nonprofit leaders who wanted to create similar, comprehensive family support systems. Dating Mark Stevens had taught me that wealth could either complicate or clarify relationships, depending on how honestly it was navigated. His initial hesitation about my financial circumstances had given way to appreciation for how thoughtfully I was managing Edmund's legacy. We had moved in together 6 months earlier, creating a partnership based on shared values rather than economic compatibility. "You haven't changed since the inheritance," he observed one evening, as we reviewed plans for a new veterans housing project we were funding together. "You've just become more yourself." The therapy sessions with Dr. Kim had helped me understand Edmund's gift wasn't just financial validation, it was permission to trust my own judgment after decades of second-guessing every decision. I no longer needed external approval to know my choices had value.
The most ambitious development was the Edmund Whitfield Institute for Character-Based Leadership, which we were launching at Ohio State University. The program would train future nonprofit leaders, social workers, and community organizers using Edmund's philosophy that authentic service, rather than financial success, should be the primary measure of leadership potential. Patricia had surprised everyone by volunteering to help develop the curriculum, drawing on her own transformation from critic to supporter as a case study in how families could break destructive patterns. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her mistakes had made her an effective advocate for other parents who were struggling with similar issues. Standing in Edmund's study in Seattle, now converted into a museum exhibit, I read his final journal entry, dated just days before his death. "I leave this fortune not as reward for perfection, but as investment in possibility. Rachel has shown that authentic character can survive criticism, that service can flourish despite financial constraints, and that kindness can persist even when it's not appreciated. If she can break our family's cycle of judgment and comparison, perhaps healing is possible for all of us." The inheritance had given me resources to help thousands of children and families, but its deeper gift was proving that choosing compassion over competition, service over selfishness, and authenticity over approval weren't character flaws to be corrected. They were strengths worthy of investment. As I locked the museum doors that evening, I understood that Edmund's greatest achievement wasn't building a successful company or accumulating wealth. It was recognizing that true prosperity comes from enabling others to flourish, that the highest form of success is helping someone else discover their own worth. The $12 million had changed my life, but the message behind it had changed everything else. Some inheritances are worth more than money. They're worth the truth about who you really are and the freedom to live that truth without apology.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.